Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of the Ancient Philosophy Podcast. I'm Doug Campbell, an assistant professor in the Department of Philosophy at Alma College in Michigan. And I'm also the host of the Ancient Philosophy Podcast, which is the podcast that explores important topics in ancient philosophy, whether that's in Greece or Rome or India or China or the Near East or beyond. And in today's episode, I interview Jacob Stump, an associate teaching professor of philosophy at Northeastern University, and he's also the undergraduate program director in the philosophy department at Northeastern. And we have an exceptionally fun and wide-ranging conversation about the Stoic view of emotions. And then the second part of our interview is really about criticisms of the Stoic view and alternatives and working out entailments and consequences of the Stoic view. And part of that is an attempt to understand the Stoic view more fully. We talk a little bit about some of the motivations behind accepting it, which are very understandable motivations, but are sometimes objectionable motivations too. Things that might be worthy of correcting and correction. We stay at a pretty general level of talking about the Stoic theory of emotions. For the purposes of this episode, there's not really any need to get into or present here the history of Stoicism. And so, without further ado, I present you my interview with Professor Jacob Stump. When students come into a philosophy class, they expect certain sets of questions. Does God exist? What is justice? What is goodness? This sort of thing. What is knowledge? These are classic canonical philosophical questions. Students might be surprised to learn that philosophy departments offer classes like the philosophy of emotions, and philosophers ask all sorts of interesting questions about emotions, both now and historically. We've done so for thousands of years. What makes emotions important or interesting to philosophers?
A couple things. One is philosophers are people, and emotions are highly significant, influential for what it's like to be a person. They can be disruptive, bothersome, they can be motivating, they can be inspiring. Just as a person, you find yourself wanting to understand your emotional life. Historically, especially, philosophers have been highly concerned to make sure that their reasoning operates well. Historically, especially, philosophers have thought emotions are one of the things that interfere with reasoning operating well. So we need to understand emotions so we can improve our reasoning. Also, philosophers tend to be, or some philosophers anyway, tend to be concerned with just understanding what goes on in the mind. What are the components of the mind, of mental life? How do they relate to each other? You look inside and you notice emotions are one of those things. So then you want to make sense of them.
Yeah, I really like that answer. I mean, it seems to me that philosophy being a very important discipline among the humanities, we have to ask a question like, what does it mean to be a human being? And any honest, complete answer to that question is going to mention the way that humans feel emotions. Uh, and also, it seems to me too that philosophers are really interested in questions of correctness. So, like, chiefly, you see this in ethics. I mean, you also see this in other parts of philosophy, like political philosophy. Something like, is it correct to give to this person X thing, or something to that effect? And then you could see something similar where, someone has experienced the loss of a loved one. And then they might ask themselves a philosophical question like, am I required to feel grief? I mean, that's a big one because grief is such a difficult emotion, and we often try to not feel something like that. We lament having to feel grief. But then on the other hand, there might be an aspect of things that's like, well, is it morally required to feel grief? Are you bad in some way if you don't feel grief? Is it a duty we have to grieve the loss of loved ones? And then there are so many tricky questions related to that. Like, what if it's a loved one with whom you didn't have quite a clear relationship? I mean, if it's a father you loved, but you also got along really badly with and you had a stormy relationship with that person, how should you feel? You might feel a big jumbled mess there. Do you think that philosophers have something to contribute to our thinking about what emotions are correct or incorrect? Or do you think that's even a bad way to think about emotions in the first place?
I do think philosophers can make precise the question of what it means for an emotion to be correct. I would separate that from the question of when an emotion might be morally good or morally bad to feel. It's easier to think about correctness. Basically, this is what philosophers tend to think. Basically, an emotion is correct, or they might say appropriate or apt. Basically, an emotion is correct when what it says is true. So let's take an easy example. You're afraid. Your fear is saying, this is dangerous. Suppose that you see a spider walk across your floor. You notice it, you become afraid. Your fear is saying, the spider's dangerous. Is that emotion correct? We can ask other things, of course. We could ask whether it's useful for you to feel. We could ask whether what your feeling scared of the spider says about your character. For now, we're asking, is the emotion correct? And when we ask that, we just wonder whether what the emotion's saying is true. So then we ask, is it true that the spider on your floor is dangerous? And it might be. If it's it might be a black widow, and then your fear would be telling you the truth. So philosopher would say, in that case, your fear is correct. It's incorrect then if what the emotion says is false, if the spider is an ordinary house spider that can't harm you. Yeah, so in technical philosophical language, what we're asking when we wonder whether an emotion is correct is whether the evaluative property, like dangerous, that type of emotion says is there, actually is there in the object the emotion's about. We could take another example. Anger. Simplifying a bit, you're angry. What's your anger saying? Philosophers tend to think your anger is saying something's wrongful. So you're angry at your friend's action. Your anger is telling you your friend's action wronged you. Is your anger correct? Again, we can ask other things. We could ask whether it's useful for you to feel. We could ask whether kind of what you're being angry in this instance says about your character. Is your anger correct? We just wonder then whether your friend's action really was wrongful. You might be someone who's highly concerned to have their emotions be accurate representations of what's out there in the world. So you might be someone who's like, I never want to be afraid unless the thing really is dangerous. I never want to be angry unless the action really is wrongful. And then what you'll be trying to do is shape over time your emotions to become more correct.
Yeah, thank you. I like those examples because they're doing a really good job of illustrating some of the finely grained distinctions that philosophers have come up with. And none of these things are new to philosophers. After all, the Stoics were thinking about some of these questions thousands of years ago. On that note, let's turn to some of the historical considerations and theories philosophers have put forward, and let's focus on the Stoics here. So, the Stoics being a school of philosophy that developed early in the Hellenistic period in ancient Greece, we won't have to say much more about them historically, other than that fact they're from the Hellenistic period. They are present in antiquity through the Roman imperial period, and there are Stoics all over the place in both Greece and Rome. Overall, if we can simplify things and just talk about a Stoic theory of emotions or the Stoic theory of emotions, what do the Stoics think emotions are?
Yeah, you're not going to believe this. Here's what they think. They have a thesis that I think at first seems outrageous. You might just check in with yourself. Right now, maybe you've got an emotion going on with you, or you might just check in with a recent experience of an emotion. What's it like to feel an emotion? There's a heaviness in your gut. There's like a tension in your chest, maybe a weight on your shoulders. You have a shortness of breath, or maybe you feel kind of buoyant or light. That's what emotional experience is often like. You feel it somewhere in your body. The Stoics say what that emotion is, what your sadness is, what your anger is, what your excitement is, what your grief is. It's just a belief. That's the Stoic theory of an emotion, that an emotion is identical to a belief. Of course, they don't think any belief is an emotion. So here, Doug, I now believe that I'm talking to you. That belief, I'm talking to my friend Doug, the Stoics won't think is an emotion. They think an emotion is a particular type of belief that we can call an evaluative belief. Well, it's a belief that something's good for me or bad for me. Take an example. You've just gotten broken up with. You're so sad. What is your sadness? It's already a funny sort of question. Like, um, you might have no trouble identifying the sadness in your body or its kind of influence on your mind. It might be obvious to you there's sadness there. But what is that sadness? It's not just a feeling, because I expect your body can feel that same way even without sadness present. It's not just a feeling. What is the sadness? The Stoics say it's a belief. It's a belief that the breakup is bad for me. That's to say, it's a belief that being now in the condition of broken up with is something that's made my life worse. That's the Stoic view of an emotion. An emotion is identical to a belief.
Yeah, when I'm teaching students Stoicism, I some of the examples I reach for will include things like greed, that greed is the belief that money is something good, something worth pursuing, something that makes my life go well. And then, of course, there would be some, other emotions related to that, right? If I believe money is something good, worth pursuing, makes my life go well, and I don't have a lot of money, I'm not just going to feel greedy. I'm also going to feel a kind of anxiety because about my present moment too. And so the Stoics believe that there are these emotions that are fundamentally this like a very certain kind of belief. And then I can think of other examples, envy. You're gonna feel envy because you want something that someone else presently has that you don't have. And then that might also lead to a kind of resentment too, these sorts of things. So the Stoics view emotions as a certain kind of belief. And then we can go back to the point you made really at the beginning of this interview, which is about what it means to be a human, what it means to be a person, and how these emotions fit into a human life. And so, what do the Stoics think that the role is of emotions? What sort of role, if any, should emotions be playing in a human life, according to the Stoics?
Zero role. Get rid of emotions is the Stoic view. They think of all emotions as mistakes. A little more specifically, they think all emotions about things outside your control are mistakes. So, return to what the Stoics think an emotion is. They think it's a belief that something's good for me. Those will be cases of what we might call positive emotions, emotions that feel good to experience. When I'm excited or delighted or proud or thrilled or kind of happy, what the Stoics say is those positive emotions are identical to some belief that what I'm experiencing is good for me. We also have negative emotions like sadness, shame, regret, anger, grief, despair. The Stoics say those emotions are identical to beliefs that something's bad for me, beliefs that something in my life is making my life worse. What role should emotions have in my life? Zero role, zero influence, because all of them are mistakes. We could even put it more strongly. The Stoics think all emotions are liars. So previously I talked about speaking very casually, we can say emotions say things. My fear says that if I were to experience this thing, it'd be bad for me. Said a little differently, that this thing's dangerous. My anger says this thing is wrongful. It's made my life worse. My sadness says the same thing. This thing I've experienced has made my life worse. But the Stoics think nothing outside of our control makes our life any better or any worse. They think that nothing outside of our control has any influence on our life. So my emotions are telling me, hey, this thing has an influence on your life. Any kind of typical experience of an emotion, it's often about something outside your control. The Stoics say that emotion's a belief. So you're angry at your friend's action. What is that anger? It's the belief that your friend has wronged you, or said a little differently, that your friend's action has made your life worse. You're sad about your pet goldfish dying. What is that sadness? It's a belief. It's a belief that living now without your goldfish is a worse life for you. Um, the Stoics are committed, though, to the view that nothing outside of your control matters for your quality of life. So they think you're not made worse off by anything someone does to you. You're not made worse off by the death of your goldfish. You're not made worse off by your own physical health, by the condition of your loved ones, by your career status, by your social status. Nothing outside of your control, they think, has any influence on the quality of your life. But my emotions say stuff outside of my control does have an influence on the quality of my life. My sadness says this thing has made me worse off. Um, that is false, according to the Stoics. They then think that sadness is a liar. To have any emotion then about something outside of your control, and that's like basically all our emotions, or most of our emotions anyway, are about things that are external to us. All of those emotions, then the Stoics say, are lying to you. They're identical to false beliefs. We shouldn't have false beliefs. So the emotions are then mistakes. And they say repeatedly that emotions are our enemies. That's an extreme claim, but I think it's also how a lot of people relate to their emotions. We tend not to like our emotions. They're disruptive, they're bothersome, they're painful, they nag us. We want to be rid of them. They interfere with our productivity. We're motivated often to try to get rid of them, to make them go away, to defeat them, or said a little differently, to kill them. I no longer want this emotion to exist. If you're relating to something by fighting it to try to make it no longer exist, that's just you relating to it as an enemy. And I think that's so common. We tend to relate to our emotions as enemies. The Stoics say, you are right to relate to your emotions like that. They really are your enemies. They lie to you. They are mistakes. You should not have them.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I totally take the point here. I mean, on the one hand, the Stoic claim that our emotions say something is one that I think a lot of people could get behind. I think fewer people could get behind the idea that emotions are beliefs, but there are ways to make that view make sense, at least at some general level. After all, if I think death is a good thing, if I believe death is a good thing, I'm probably not going to fear it. So in a way, it does make sense to say that like our emotions follow beliefs, at least at some level. But of course, this view that emotions are beliefs runs into a really big problem, which is that our emotions don't feel like beliefs at all. But still, the Stoics do hold this view very, very clearly from Greek Stoicism through Roman Stoicism. The Stoics hold the view that our emotions are beliefs. But I think the thing that people could get behind the very least is that our emotions are false beliefs. They're false beliefs about what's important, what's worth valuing. So here's an example that I think comes up quite a lot in Stoic literature is are like the consolations of someone who has died or consolations for someone who has recently lost someone. So you might say something like, "Look, I've lost this loved one. I miss them so much. I'm grieving. I'm feeling this very big emotion. It's a very difficult emotion to deal with." And then the Stoics write this literature that's something like, well, you really shouldn't feel that way because your emotion is saying something, but it's also based on a belief about what's worth valuing or what's in our control, and that belief is actually just false. This is like, right, to use a phrase, there's no use crying over spilled milk. This person has died. You can't control what's going to happen. You can't control what's going to happen. Could you? So that's just one example. Grief being based on a false belief about what's in our control. And of course, you're going to feel some very big things if you're trying to control mortality and human nature. That's just not something you can control. Can you think of another example that will illustrate the idea that Stoics think that our emotions are based on false beliefs?
Well, there's really two parts to that claim. One part is our emotions are based on beliefs. I mean, they say something even stronger. They say the emotion's identical to a belief. It just is a belief. That's part of the claim. The other part of the claim is that in every case, the belief's false. At least in every case where your emotion's about something external to you and not under your control. And that's the majority of emotions. So the Stoics are committed to thinking, yeah, in the majority of cases, your emotion's a mistake. It's identical to a belief that's false. Um, of course, in some cases, an emotion is incorrect. I had the example earlier of you being afraid of a spider in your apartment. Suppose it's an ordinary spider that cannot harm you. The emotion is then incorrect. What it's saying is false. So it's not so controversial that an emotion um, can be saying something that's false or can be incorrect. That's just true.
Yeah.
It's highly controversial. In fact, I think it's false and uh, dangerous, really, to believe. It's highly controversial that your emotions are beliefs. And if why would someone think that? You had the example earlier of if I believe death is a thing that will benefit me, then what do you know? I won't be scared of death. I sort of have doubts about that example. I might well believe that death is honorable and it will benefit me in the sense of my legacy or be useful for my family, but still be terrified of death. Our emotions aren't always responsive to our beliefs. That already puts pressure on the Stoic view. We can intensify the kind of objection there. Um, yeah, but the view that an emotion is identical to a belief, why would someone think that? Well, it's because when you zoom in on an emotion, you see it has a certain structure. Any emotion is about something. I'm sad about the breakup. I'm excited about the vacation. I'm angry at my friend's action. Any emotion is about something. It's not only about it, it's about it in a certain way. Any emotion's about something, and this is technical philosophy speak. It ascribes to that thing an evaluative property. So I'm sad about the breakup, and my sadness says the breakup is something bad for me. It ascribes the evaluative property badness to the breakup. I'm excited about the vacation. My excitement says the upcoming vacation will be good for me. I'm angry about my friend's action. My anger says my friend's action is something that wronged me, is bad for me. Zoom in on an emotion and you observe it has a certain structure. It's about something in a certain way. It's about something and it ascribes an evaluative property to that thing. Another way we can think about it is my sadness says the breakup is bad for me. My anger says the action has wronged me. Now we sit back and we ask, what else in my mental life is able to say something like that? What else in my mental life has that same structure? What else in my mental life can be about something and ascribe to an evaluative property? And at that point, belief is like, I can. You can believe your friend's action is wrongful. You can believe the breakup's bad for you. You can believe anything that an emotion says. At that point, it's like, oh, what? A belief has the very same structure as an emotion? Maybe the two are identical. So that's one way to motivate the view that an emotion is identical to a belief.
Yeah, thank you. That was great. A really important clarification for sure. So let's talk about another feature of emotions and our mental lives according to the Stoics, specifically the way that they think our inner lives are within our control. So earlier you talked about the way our external world isn't within our control, and that might give rise to all these emotional disturbances like grief, for example. But I'm going to read off to you just one quick sentence from Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. This is Meditations, Book 7, Saying 2. I can control my thoughts as necessary. Then how can I be troubled? What is outside my mind means nothing to it. Now, of course, he asked a rhetorical question there, how can I be troubled? But it is a mere rhetorical question. The force of that sentence is, since I can control my thoughts, I really shouldn't be troubled by anything. And that use of the word control there is really interesting. We could also think of dominating, reining in, forcing our mental life to be in compliance with something or something to that effect. Given that Marcus Aurelius used that word control, can you say something about what the Stoics think it means to control our emotions? And do you think that's a particularly good way of relating to our emotional lives and to our inner lives?
I do think it's so tempting to want to control our emotions. Often they're painful, they're disruptive. We want to get rid of them. We try to get rid of them. They stick around. We think, oh, I just need to try harder. If I try harder, if I put more effort into it, if I'm more self-disciplined, if I'm in some sense more tough, then I can get rid of the emotion, or then I can have full control over my emotional life. It's also kind of a hope of many different philosophical, spiritual traditions that if I live a certain way, then I will never again have to suffer. The Stoics are explicit with that promise throughout their writings. Epictetus in the Enchiridion, the instruction manual for living as a Stoic, begins, it's the first thing he says, if you think a certain way, then you won't suffer again. If you think a different way, then you will suffer. So I think it's highly tempting to want control over our emotional life, to try for it, to think that if we're unable to control our emotional life, we're at fault, we're somehow a failure. The Stoics, yeah, oof, I mean, you want to try controlling your emotional life. They have one strategy for going about it. I think it's interesting to wonder about where this desire to control your emotional life comes from. Uh, this might sound harsh, but increasingly, I think it comes from a sort of insecurity, even a sort of cowardice. I won't be okay if I feel this emotion, so I have to make sure I don't feel it. Or I'm too scared to feel this emotion, so I have to make sure I don't feel it. You asked if it's possible to have control over your emotional life. I mean, you tell me, what have you found? We've both lived a bit of time. I happen to think, no, it's not possible. You can, of course, control how you express an emotion. When I get angry, I don't have to yell at you, but you don't have direct control over whether or not you experience an emotion. You do have direct control over what you believe. So if the Stoics were right that emotions are beliefs, then what we'd find is you have a lot of control over your emotions. That's kind of the Stoic hope. Um, if you take your own experience seriously, even for a moment, I think you'll recognize you aren't able to control whether or not you experience some emotion. And contemporary philosophy of emotions has a really good explanation for that. I'll just mention what I have in mind. I'm not sure how much we want to get into it, but the leading thesis in contemporary philosophy of emotions is that an emotion is a perception, not a belief. We don't have control over our perceptions. If you're listening to this right now, I'll just keep talking. And while I'm talking, you try to stop hearing me. Here I am talking. Can you control your perception to the extent that while I'm talking, you aren't able to hear me? It's not possible. Or if you think of an optical illusion, I grew up in Oklahoma, and I can remember as a boy walking on the street in summertime and looking at the end of the street, and there appears to be a puddle of water at the end of the street. I know it's a mirage, but even though I know that, I still perceive the puddle of water at the end of the street. We can't control our perceptions. In philosophy of emotions today, the leading thesis is that an emotion is a perception. If that's right, then it makes sense why, despite trying so hard in many cases, we can't control whether or not we experience some emotion. You can't control your other perceptions.
Right. So it does sound like, from a contemporary philosophy of emotions point of view, the Stoic view that emotions simply are beliefs or are identical to beliefs isn't such a popular view. Stoicism, on the other hand, has just been rebounding in popularity. So, like, I mean, in wider culture. And of course, ever since antiquity, Stoicism has waxed and waned in popularity. There are other philosophers like Plato who have been popular forever, whereas I don't think you would ever say that about Stoicism. Do you think that part of the reason why Stoicism is so popular today is that we are in a society that wants the stoic promise of control over our inner lives? I mean, it's a very tempting thing, as you said. Epictetus begins the Enchiridion that way, and of course, it would be reckless to speak about society in sweeping generalizations and to speak about society monolithically. But to the extent that we're okay speaking about society as a monolith, do you think that it is fair to say that one reason why Stoicism is so popular today is that we struggle with sitting with our emotions, and so we want to believe that we can in fact control this sometimes unpleasant part of being a human being?
Totally, absolutely. Um, I mean, I think the default way of relating to your emotions is I don't like them, I want them to go away, and I'm going to use the tool that my whole education has trained in me when I have a problem. It's the tool I've been trained in to solve any problem. It's the tool I'm really comfortable using, my reasoning, my arguments. I already don't like my emotions. They interfere with my life. They interfere with my productivity. They're painful. I want to get rid of them, and I'm going to use my reasoning to beat them up. I'm going to argue against my emotion to try to get rid of it. I just think that's everywhere. I think it's the default condition. That's how most people relate to their emotions. Stoicism comes along and it says, hey, you're absolutely right. Your emotions are your enemies. You should beat them up. You should get rid of them. And I'm going to teach you how to do that even better. I'm going to give you techniques that you can use to argue more effectively against your emotions so that you don't have to experience them again. So it tells people in a way what they want to hear. It tells them that how they're living is right. And it promises strategies for making them even more effective at doing the thing they're trying to do. That's one reason why I think it's so popular today. It's how everyone's already living, even if they haven't heard of Stoicism. Here's another reason why I think it's so popular, especially in certain parts of the world, including the United States. So let me tell you a story. There's something wrong with you. You're not as you should be, but it's okay. If you try really hard, you can do better. And you can even become perfect if you try really hard. And the way to become better is to study a really old text and to do what it says. So where have you heard that story before? That there's something wrong with you, you're inadequate in some way due to your nature. But you can become better if you try really hard and take your mental life seriously. And the place to look for guidance is in a really old text. Where have you heard that story before?
It sounds to me like virtually all religions.
All religions is right. I mean, a lot of them anyway, and including Christianity. Um, so Stoicism, it's like a secular version of the Christian story. It says you're inadequate. There's something wrong with you. You're irrational. You have too much affinity for your body, which is in the Stoic view. I think this is a quotation from, is it Cicero or Marcus Aurelius? Garbage, trash. But don't worry, you can become better. You just have to become more rational. That's to say, correct your beliefs. Make sure you have only true beliefs. Exert lots of control over your mental life. Take it really seriously, and you'll improve. And the way to, at this point in history, the way to make progress there is to look for guidance to really old books. So if you find yourself already sympathetic to the Christian story, or at least the structure of it, then I think you're primed to like Stoicism. There's so many other reasons why it's popular. I mean, we live in a world that's highly unstable at the moment. It's kind of hard to predict what will happen. It's hard to know how to intervene effectively. It's kind of overwhelming. Stoicism says, look, all you got to focus on is what's in your control. That's the only stuff really that matters. So just do that. And the stuff that happens outside of you, it's not going to affect you as long as you stay strong. And I think people are comforted by that. Yeah, so those are some reasons why I think it keeps increasing in popularity.
Yeah, I take that. I mean, thinking of Stoicism as somehow a quote unquote secular religion, which of course is an oxymoron, but the point makes sense, right? A secular religion, as you put it, to quote you, it's a secular version of some religious stories. I think that that makes a lot of sense because, especially if we look at other parts of Stoicism, they can be very attractive to people with certain kinds of, naturalist or scientific worldviews, but they also want what religion has to offer, which is, as you put it, some account of our inadequacy, and then some honestly, frankly, quick fixes to that. That like you have everything you need already to be happy. You just need to get your mental life sorted out, which relies on this view of controlling our inner lives. So we can see that that might be something worth drawing people's attention to about Stoicism. I'm curious, what are some other problems you might see in the the way that Stoicism encourages us to relate to our emotions? Are there other problems you can perceive with the attitude that Stoicism encourages towards our emotions?
Totally, yes. One thing is if you're trying to live as a Stoic, and I expect some of your listeners have experience with this. If you're trying to live as a Stoic, here's what you do. You notice as you go about your day whenever you're emotionally disturbed. So you're monitoring your emotional life closely to notice whenever you become anxious or sad or scared or angry, whenever you start to feel any emotion. If you're doing the Stoic thing, you will think that emotion's a mistake. I shouldn't be feeling it. If you're doing the Stoic thing, you'll then think that the way for me to stop feeling it, to correct the mistake, is to convince myself that what the emotion is saying is false. That thing that my sadness is saying is bad for me, it's not actually bad for me. I need to convince myself that what the emotion is saying is false. And the way for me to do that is to start arguing with myself in my head. I expect we all have experience of this, especially with emotions that nag us. They won't go away. We don't want to feel that emotion. We start arguing with ourselves in our head, trying to convince ourselves that whatever the sadness, the anger, the shame, the guilt, the regret is saying, it's not true. You're now doing this. You're walking to class, you're sitting in the park, arguing with yourself in your head, trying to beat up the emotion to make it go away. You're turning your mental life into this place of hostility. You're making your own mind a battlefield. What's that like? I mean, I can tell you from personal experience, it's awful to have a war raging in your head, a war between one part of you and another part of you, and you keep it up. You keep kind of, as it were, adding fuel to the fire of that war. It's not an enjoyable way to live. I think it closes you off. It doesn't make you open to other people. Kind of more generally, if you're not letting yourself experience the fullness of emotions, it's very difficult then to have an intimate relationship with yourself or with other people. The way you acquire intimacy is, by really letting yourself feel whatever it is you're feeling and being okay with it. It's also how you develop self-trust, a kind of honesty, integrity, and then sharing that with someone else can really strengthen the bond between the two of you. The two of you start to vibe or feel together. If you're not letting yourself feel your emotions, if you're trying to defeat them, you just make yourself so lonely. I again know from personal experience. It's living the Stoic life, it's so lonely. That's a real cost. I mean, it's a real cost, the loneliness that Stoicism, gives you. I happen to think it's a cost that's not worth paying. There are other objections to Stoicism too, other philosophical objections, especially to the thesis that an emotion is identical to a belief. So this gets a bit more technical, but maybe a listener's like, yeah, I get it. I know what it's like to rage against myself in my head. But I'm going to be honest with you, I just don't want to experience these emotions. I want to get rid of them. And I guess it does make me lonely, but it's worth it to me. Like, I'm going to do the Stoic thing. The response to that is like, I mean, go for it if you like. I think with a lot of these variations of philosophy as a way of life, you try them out and you see what happens. But there's a really strong, in fact, I think decisive philosophical objection to the view that an emotion is identical to a belief. And let me just say, if an emotion is not a belief, it doesn't make sense to argue against it. It doesn't make sense to use your reasoning to try to get rid of the emotion. Arguing, reasoning, that's how you change beliefs. But if emotion is not a belief, that whole strategy of emotional regulation, this sort of cognitive behavioral therapy strategy, it just doesn't make sense. And when you're failing at it, it's not because you're not doing it well enough. It's because the tool you're trying to use actually can't accomplish the job you're trying to use it for. Okay, so what's the philosophical objection? There's a couple. I'll start with the sort of most simple one is to appeal to a very common experience. If an emotion is identical to a belief, then anytime you have an emotion, you should also be having the corresponding belief. But that just doesn't happen. So think of a case where suppose you're on the top floor of a skyscraper. It's one of those tourist attractions in a major city. And there's a glass panel in the floor that allows you to look all the way to the street below. And you're with your friend and you walk to the glass panel and you look down and you start shaking. You're so scared. And your friend's laughing at you and your friend's like, what, do you believe standing there is dangerous? And you're like, no, of course not. No, I'm not dumb. Like, I know the engineers, the architects built the skyscraper to be super safe. I know they wouldn't allow people to stand here if they were actually dangerous. But while you're saying that, your voice is slipping, your skin is sweating, your heart's racing, you're so scared. You don't believe standing there is dangerous. Despite that, you still feel afraid. Or change the example. Suppose you grew up in like a really kind of socially conservative, strict household that raised you to believe dancing's morally wrong. And now you're in university or, you're outside of university, now you're an adult. And anytime you go out dancing, you feel guilty about it. And you tell your friends, and your friends are like, wait, you don't believe dancing's bad, do you? You don't believe it's actually morally wrong. You're like, of course I don't. Like, I don't think dancing harms me. I don't think it harms anyone else. But still, I feel guilty when I dance. You don't believe that it's wrong, but you still feel an emotion that's saying it's wrong. These are examples of what philosophers call recalcitrant emotions. They're emotions that don't align with your beliefs. You feel the emotion, but you don't have the corresponding belief. If the Stoic view of emotion is correct, the phenomenon of recalcitrant emotions should never happen. Anytime you feel the emotion, you must have the corresponding belief. The two are identical, is what the Stoics say. But that's just false. This experience happens all the time. I think that objection is really important to speak to someone who's like, look, I'm trying the Stoic thing and it's not working. And that must be because I'm not trying hard enough. Let me try harder. Let me try harder. Let me make my argument stronger. Let me be more self-disciplined. Let me be more tough to try to get rid of my emotion. There's a way, like when you fail at the Stoic thing, there's a way where you think the proper response is to try harder. I must not be trying hard enough. But what this objection says is no, the reason you're not succeeding is because an emotion is not the sort of thing you can change with reasoning or with arguments. It's not a belief.
Yeah, I take the point, and I think that objection is really helpful in seeing something about emotions. The Stoics like to think that our emotions were defects to the extent that the false beliefs that they are identical to are defects. And therefore, once we get rid of false beliefs, we should be able to get rid of our emotions. And then your objections, points out that actually some emotions are recalcitrant in the sense that they're going to resist being removed in that way. So what I take from this, and I'm want you to see, I want you to point out whether I'm right or wrong here in drawing this conclusion. What I would infer from the problem of recalcitrant emotions is that our emotions are a part of being a human being that just simply cannot be eliminated. That having emotions is just a fundamental, ineliminable part of being a human being. And that therefore, what the Stoics ultimately get wrong is not just that emotions are based on, or not just that emotions are identical to false beliefs, but it's the whole upshot of their view, which is that you can control your inner life such that your emotions can be destroyed. That's what actually the Stoics are wrong about, because being a human being is just being someone who, among other things, feels things. Do you think that's a correct conclusion to draw from the problem of recalcitrant emotions?
Totally. I mean, to be a little sassy about it, Stoicism starts with the observation that the best life is the life in accordance with nature or in harmony with nature. And one thing they mean is the best life for a human is the life that's in harmony with human nature. But they've just really gotten wrong what human nature's like. The emotions aren't the sort of things you can control. They're not identical to beliefs. Arguing with them is not an effective way to gain relief from them. Yeah, so they've just made a
Yeah.
mistake with humongous consequences about what it's like to be a human.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit about this, like the arguing thing. I mean, before you presented us with the problem of recalcitrant beliefs, you spoke a little bit about the idea of arguing with emotions. And to me, I felt like it was right to break down what you were saying into two, and you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. But what I took away from what you were saying was twofold. So on the one hand, there was something that I could describe as like the othering of our emotions, by which I mean you turn your emotions into something alien. And literally, that's a great word to describe this, because you are alienating a part of yourself from yourself. And that is destructive in some way. But then the second part is that not only do you other this part of yourself, not only do you separate your emotions from you, but then the next thing you do is proceed to go argue with them. Which I will just point out with my own bit of sassiness. That's the most academic thing ever, to go be a contrarian to yourself. But do you think I'm right in diagnosing that problem as being twofold? That on the one hand, there's the alienation of a part of us, and then there is also the arguing, the hostility, the antagonistic relationship between what is fundamentally actually just a part of ourselves. Do you think I'm right in diagnosing the problem that way?
Yes, yeah, I do. Yeah, so the Stoics say what you really are is your rationality, and they think your emotions are irrational. So your emotions aren't really you. That gives the sort of alienation. But you can imagine thinking that and not making the further mistake that you should be beating up your emotions or using your arguments to try to get rid of them. You could say, okay, my emotions aren't really me, but I'm not going to beat them up. I'm going to take care of them or comfort them or be there with them or listen to them. That's
Mhm.
possible. So I do think you're right that these two things are separate.
Yeah, if I had to choose among the options you gave me, I would say listen to them make sense, especially if we think that our emotions are in fact saying something, that our emotions might be alerting us to something, to trying to teach us something, something like that, as opposed to having an antagonistic relationship with them. But as you pointed out, the Stoics think that we are our rationality. And so not only are our emotions false beliefs, and they're also distortions of our rational nature. And then furthermore, they're in some way anti-natural accretions, right? They're things that are actually opposed to our fundamental rational human nature. And so, to the extent that Stoics believe we should live in accordance with nature, we should live in accordance with rationality. So, of course, it makes a lot of sense that all they would hold this family of views. But it does bump up hard against the problem of recalcitrant beliefs, because if you really believe that emotions were false beliefs, then for every emotion there would be a corresponding belief. You get rid of those beliefs, you get rid of the emotions. In fact, not only is that an entailment of their view, that's actually their view. They're actually right. The Marcus Aurelius passage about control was exactly based on that idea. Epictetus's promise throughout the discourses and throughout the Enchiridion is this idea, well, if you just changed your mindset, if you just change your inner life, all of these emotions would disappear. And so not only is it an entailment of the view, it's actually the view they advertise to people. But that just means so much the worse for their view, given the problem of recalcitrant emotions.
It's the view they advertise. As you said, Marcus Aurelius is highly optimistic about the possibility of exerting full control over your emotional life. He's just philosophically committed to that. When you read the meditations, then, Marcus Aurelius' meditations, these days, I find it's kind of sad. Like I have a lot of sympathy for him because you find these passages in the meditations where he's like, basically, oh, like why can't I do better? Why am I still having these emotions that interfere with my life? I must not be disciplined enough, tough enough, exerting enough control over myself. And you feel for him. He's
Mhm.
like a little sad. He's caught in the grip of a philosophical view that is um, is making him think that he's a failure whenever he can't control something that just isn't possible to control.
Yeah. Yeah, I take the point. I read him very similarly. In a way, in fact, the book testifies to the problem of recalcitrant emotions. So that's certainly a point. I also take the idea that, like, yeah, I mean, we haven't been using this language so far, but this does fit in really well to the Stoic ethical view, the Stoic theory of virtues and vices. We've actually avoided using that language, but but the Stoics believe that, yeah, you're a failure in when you fail to control these parts of your inner lives, except they would not refer to them as failures, they would refer to them as vices. Right? When I said earlier that greed is an emotion that is identical to the belief that money is good, worth pursuing, and so on. Greed is not just an emotion, but it's also a vice. It's a vice because it's a false belief and a distortion of a rational nature.
Yeah, if you
Um,
think of Stoicism as secular, a form of secular Christianity, vice then plays the role of sin.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And again, that whole worldview can be very appealing. One last thought about Marcus Aurelius, unless there's something more you want to add about him. But one last thought about him. I mean, he really was a sad guy. I mean, he wrote the Meditations in the last decade or so of his life. Um, he was on a war. He was in campaign in Germany fighting these tribes, the Macromanic tribes during the Macromanic War. I mean, the book is rife with this like war journaling about like having seen dead bodies, decapitated corpses, and so on. Some of which were surely bodies decapitated by his own forces, but then others were probably Roman forces killed by the German tribal enemies. So like it was a very sad it was a he was a very sad dour guy. I mean, he had 13 children, 8 of whom died before him, which is just staggering when you're the Roman emperor. So he was a sad guy, and so I understand the feeling of all of these emotions really suck and are unpleasant or difficult. Here, there's a view I've been taught that allows me to get rid of all of them. It promises me as an escape, but in reality, you just bump up against the recalcitrance of these emotions. It's
Yeah,
human nature to feel grief.
totally. And it of course makes so much sense. You're suffering, you want to gain relief from the suffering. That's, of course. You're emotionally suffering, you want to gain release from the emotional suffering. You want to make the emotion go away. Um, yeah, I think the mistake of the Stoics is to think the way to gain relief is to make the emotion go away. There's an alternative. The way to gain relief is to sort of relax into the emotion. It's to do precisely the opposite of the Stoic thing. I mean, people today talk about accepting the emotion or letting things go. Really, I think it's letting go of resisting the emotion. So the Stoics are like, resist the emotion to defeat it. Just the opposite thing is emphasized by other schools of thought, other spiritual, philosophical, religious traditions, is to let go of resisting the emotion, which then allows yourself fully to feel it and enables it to move through you.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then I just, of course we want to gain relief from suffering, but the Stoic approach, I think it's not an effective way to do it.
Yeah. I hear you. So let's lean in a little bit more to these other traditions. Do I mean you've definitely alluded to some positive views then. Let's think a little bit more about that. Do other approaches have merits or things that we should learn from or adopt when it comes to our emotions?
Yes. And if you've been trying to do the Stoic thing, you have been trained already in a very useful skill, the skill of monitoring your mental life to notice whenever you begin to feel some emotion. Now we just take a different route. Instead of trying to defeat the emotion, argue, make it go away, we notice probably what's there is some initial resistance to the emotion. I don't want to feel it. I'm resisting giving my full attention to it, or I'm judging myself for it. You can relax that. So this is letting go of resistance and give a sort of attention to the emotion, which I think acts as a little hug. Like, when a child is crying, upset about something, imagine you start reasoning with the child, like, hey, you shouldn't be crying right now, but it doesn't work. But if instead you sort of get there in the moment, you're fully present with the child, and you give the kid a hug, it actually comforts the child. You can do the same thing with your emotion. It's a bit harder to talk about than argue against it. It's a bit harder to teach than argue against it. But we also just haven't given much kind of time, really, most of us, to trying to learn this alternative approach. Anyway, the alternative approach is you let go of resistance to the emotion. You give it a sort of non-judgmental attention. You kind of move closer to it with your awareness. You're really now there with it, letting yourself feel it. And in some cases, relaxing into it might be enough for it just to move through you. In some cases, I find when I'm letting go of resistance, giving a kind of non-judgmental attention to the emotion, in some cases, I find it's useful to then ask, like, what's up? Or who are you? Or what are you? What do you have to tell me? Mm-hmm. And you wait and listen. And often what it has to tell you is something that can be expressed in one sentence. It's really simple, but it's the thing that you haven't been letting yourself feel or think or recognize. You've been kind of dishonest with yourself. And then I find once you really hear that, you let yourself listen to the emotion, it's what brings about the relief. The emotion then moves through you. it no longer kind of nags at you, torments you. As it were, it's delivered its message, or you've been there with it, you've comforted it. And yeah, it won't now kind of bother you anymore. I do think with this other approach, it's really important not to relate to it as a goal to achieve. You don't go into it like, I got to get rid of this emotion, so I'm going to employ this other approach. Instead, you go into it with like curiosity, a kind of openness. Or another way to say it is you go into it with a love of reality. Like, I love reality. I want to be there with reality. And part of reality right now is I've got this emotion in me. I'm courageous enough to be there with it instead of being scared of it and trying to defeat it. And then you go from there. So this other approach you find in traditions like Buddhism, a little bit in Taoism, and then there's a strong presence of it in contemporary mindfulness circles and writings.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned the word curiosity there because that's what the before you said that, that was the word that was coming into my mind as I was listening to you. That instead of approaching an emotion with a sense of antagonism or hostility, you're curious and you want to learn from it. Right? You mentioned questions that you would ask it, and I was thinking the question is something like, well, like what are you trying to tell me, emotion? What is it that I can learn from you? What is it that you're trying to say or alert me to?
Mm.
And yeah, I mean, if your secret goal in these dealings with your emotions, if your secret goal is to find a way to destroy the emotion, if you're asking these questions with the hope of secretly destroying it, you're going to bump into the problem of recalcitrant emotions. You're not going to actually really be able to eliminate these things that you think of as eliminable because they are actually fundamental parts of a human experience.
Totally. And just think of the kid example again. It's very helpful for me. If you're giving the kid a quick hug to try to make the crying go away, like the child will recognize that. It's like performative. You're not really there. It's not going to work. So if you're doing this opposite approach to try to make the emotion go away, it's just not going to work. I mean, another way to say it is the emotion won't feel comfortable enough to open up to you, to speak to you.
Yeah, so here's a big question then. And I suspect the answer would vary tremendously from emotion to emotion. But in general, what can emotions teach us?
An emotion indicates to you what you need to let go of to be more free. Often the emotion's about something in the past or the future. If it's about something in the past, it's often something that you're not letting yourself accept. To say it differently, you're not letting yourself recognize that thing is actually real. It's like actually part of reality. It actually happened. You're not letting yourself recognize that, or you're not letting yourself be okay with it. You're still resisting it. You're trying to find explanations that it wasn't actually how your emotion's saying it was. Or if your emotion's about something in the future, uh, it's often motivated by a sort of anxiety or fear that you won't be okay if the future turns out like this. So what the emotion's indicating to you then is what you need to let go of to be more free. You need to let go of something, your resistance to something in the past, so that your thoughts your awareness, your attention can be here fully in the present. Or you need to let go of something that is making you scared of a certain outcome in the future. Again, so that your awareness, your attention can return fully to the present. So then if you think of emotions like that, any emotion gives you this like golden opportunity to do some deep inner work, to let go of something so you can be a more fully present human.
Mhm.
That's one thing I think emotions have to teach us.
Yeah, yeah, that's a very insightful and fascinating. I mean, it really drives home some of the problems with Stoicism because there's clearly this really, really important thing, among other things, surely, but this is one very important thing that our emotions can teach us. And if our goal is to eliminate the emotion and not listen to it, then we don't have the opportunity to learn this important thing. So not only does Stoicism bump up against all these philosophical problems, there's actually a real opportunity lost with Stoicism because you won't learn this. You won't learn from this valuable source of information that we naturally have present in our lives, right? Our emotions are just part of us and we can learn from them. And Stoicism wants to basically ignore that valuable source of information in exchange for alienating ourselves from it and creating an antagonistic relationship between us and it.
I think it's exactly right. Yeah, um, that's right. It doesn't make you more free. It might help you get promoted or fight better on the battlefield, or get bigger muscles or something. It
Mhm.
might really kind of help you with some things, but it comes at an extreme cost. You don't grow as a person in the way we're talking about. I think it makes you lonely. You can't have close, intimate, loving relationships with other people or with yourself. Um, yeah, and it doesn't make you more free. It sort of
Mhm.
closes you off from the world.
Yeah.
Uh, yeah,
Yeah, and I imagine it might create a kind of whack-a-mole situation where you're suppressing some emotion temporarily for success on the battlefield, for example. But if you succeed on the battlefield, you're going to have a long life after the battlefield. And some of those things you suppressed for temporary success might create issues that pop up somewhere else. And so it's like playing a game of whack-a-mole. You hit something down over here, it'll pop up later in this perhaps unexpected place. And that could create some real problems for you down the road.
totally. Yeah, like it's so easy to imagine the Stoic doing well on the battlefield or like in the middle of a raging storm on the ocean, something like that. But now the Stoic's like in a disagreement with someone he loves, or like watching a movie that contests his conception of the world, um, or traveling in a foreign country. What's the Stoic like then? Yeah, and I think you're right. It's yeah, the whack-a-mole thing I really like. Yeah, it might get rid of a problem right now. And that in some cases that might be really important, but it creates a problem later on.
So when it comes to this idea of letting go, that's easier said than done, and it's also easier to say it than to fully understand what you mean. Could you make some of the ideas you're talking about a little bit more precise?
Good. First, come back to the Stoic approach. You can imagine teaching the Stoic strategy of emotional regulation in like premise conclusion form on a blackboard. Like my emotion says this, and now I need to construct an argument that proves that thing false. Like it's so easy to teach, especially as philosophy professors, the Stoic strategy of regulating your emotions. This alternative strategy, it's like easy to talk about. You need to process an emotion, you need to accept something, you need to let something go, you need to allow yourself really to feel the emotion. It's really easy to talk about, but it's not obvious exactly what those mental activities are. So how can you learn them? Like I've been interested in spotting places in life where those same activities turn up, but it's like easy to practice them there. It's kind of hard to practice them on your emotions. That's like an advanced um, exercise of the skill. What are some areas of life where it's easy, kind of straightforward to practice letting go of resistance or accepting something? And one of my favorite examples here is like cold water. So there's a moment when you get in the cold ocean, or you could do a cold shower. There's a moment when you really tense up. You're resisting the sensation of the cold. There's lots of ways to get through, the swim in the cold ocean or the cold plunge or the cold shower. One way is like, oh, I'm tough in this. I'm gonna be okay, and you're resisting it. Another way is you could like distract yourself. You could like play your favorite song and keep your attention on your favorite song. You can distract yourself from the experience. You can fight the experience. What would it be to accept the experience or to let go of resistance to the experience? To let go of resistance to the discomfort? the relaxing into it with the breath, that's letting go of resistance. And you can actually practice this, yeah, with any physical discomfort, including yeah, cold sensations, cold water. You sort of breathe into it, relax into it, notice the discomfort, don't distract yourself from it. Um, I think there's no better way to say it.
Mhm.
And if any of your listeners take me up on this, you'll be able to recognize the moment. Like that's the moment of letting go of resistance. That's what it feels like to let go of resistance. And now when it comes to letting go of resistance to emotional discomfort or accepting some emotion, it's the same thing. I think it feels the exact same way. Breathe into it, relax into it, just like you practice with the cold water, but now toward the emotional disruption in your life,
Mhm.
or toward the emotion itself. Yeah.
Mhm.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And a great example with discomfort there, because it occurs to me that when you feel discomfort, let's say physical discomfort to make this easier, you might also feel an additional discomfort because you're uncomfortable with the discomfort. And so you actually feel discomfort twice, but that you can actually let go of one of those feelings of discomfort and weirdly, paradoxically, feel comfortable with the discomfort you're feeling. And so you just accept the discomfort. And in this way, you let go of resisting the thing you're feeling and therefore actually make yourself comfortable with discomfort.
Exactly. It changes the whole experience. You can do the same thing the next time you stub your toe. You
Mhm.
stub your toe, and there's like a second or two before
The
you know
pain starts.
it
Yeah.
hurts or the pain starts. So the sensation is going to be there. But the sensation, this might sound bizarre, but really just try it. The sensation isn't inherently painful or even uncomfortable. It's just a sensation. And if you welcome it or be curious about it instead of resist it or fight it or dislike it, you can relate to it as a nice warming sensation. It almost becomes pleasurable, kind of nice. In any case, it doesn't become as painful as when you resist it or, you know, yeah.
Well, thanks so much, Jacob. Really appreciate you coming on. That was super insightful and fascinating.
Thanks so much, Doug. I really support what you're doing here, and it's always so nice to talk with you.